Hello friends and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about how to become a monk, because I've been asked this a number of times recently and in the past. I did make a video before which is still there called How to Become a Monk, but as they used to say in school, I could do better. That was in a rather unusual environment of a Hindu temple with all kinds of noise and distractions going on, including the Hindu priest whom I went to assist with his offerings and puja at the beginning. So a little out of the ordinary, to say the least. So how to become a monk, or rather how not to become. Because becoming a monk or a nun, now I'm talking about becoming a monk because I'm male of the species and this is my experience, and having no access or ability to see what happens with nuns' ordinations, because we live very separately, I can't recount that, but I would imagine it's the same from the understanding we have from the scriptures. The ordination process is much the same, and the time it takes to ordain is much the same. Really, it isn't becoming anything. Becoming a monk is all about renunciation, letting go of worldly life, letting go of one's identity in a very real way. It isn't superficial. You do abandon everything. So there's very little in the way of becoming about it, and of course in the practice, this is what the practice is all about, becoming free from rebirth, otherwise known as becoming. Being born into the next moment through desire and craving. Of course, this practice is about the eradication of that, and so is becoming a monk. It is the extreme form of the practice, the other end of the scale, to no practice at all, but somewhere in the middle, lay life, one can practice in also varying degrees. And in the process of becoming a monk, getting to know monasteries, you go through these different stages, which I will talk about now. The first question one has to ask oneself is, why do I want to become a monk? If it is to run away from a horrible life and all of your problems, and to seek peace and solitude of a beautiful forest environment, living harmoniously in community away from the outside world, then this is very much the wrong reason, because it's very inaccurate. It's in fact quite the opposite. All of your problems come with you, and they are in fact by yourself and others put under a magnifying glass, exaggerated and really made all the worse, and you are also in a very different environment, living a life of austerity where everything seems a lot more vivid and difficult to cope with than ever it did before. You've also no distraction from your problems. Everything of that nature is taken away from you, or you have given it away. So you really need to be coming into the idea of ordination, of becoming a monk, of renunciation, taking up the life of a samana, the holy life, with a clean slate. You should really clear the decks and start with a new beginning, having tidied up everything in your background in the past as best you can. Then there is less to be bothering you mentally in your mind. So it is not an escape, it is more a running into. We're not getting away from it all, we're really getting into it all. This is the practice. So not only is the practice difficult, more difficult in the world of monastics, so in this life as a monk, because it's far more intense, the process of becoming a monk is quite long and arduous in itself and requires a lot of patience and endurance. Now, these things I'm talking about are all qualities. So even if you're not interested in becoming a monk, or not interested in the stages, it's worth listening to this, because it is all apparent, these things all become apparent in worldly life also, as lay people, either as Buddhist practitioners or people from other religions experiencing changes in their lives, difficult circumstances, and the different stages of ordinary life equate very well to this magnification, this crucible effect of putting oneself into the process of becoming a monk through ordination, into this tradition. Now, of course, I am also only talking about this Theravada tradition, and specifically the Thai Forest tradition, albeit it's pretty much similar, the ordination process, across the board throughout Theravada Buddhism. Okay, you ask yourself why? Well, the reason has to be, and the question I'm most often asked is, why did you become a monk? And my answer, usually, because I get asked that question so often, is to be happy. And that is the reason. But I know happiness is just an emotion. This is really a symptom of contentment. So you should be looking to become a monk to arrive at the ultimate contentment, which is the eradication of greed, hatred and delusion, the root defilements of desire and ignorance. Desire to have, desire not to have, and ignorance not to understand how that is causing suffering. And this aim of this holy life is to become free from suffering within this lifetime. So this is the goal. And it has to be understood that this might not even be achieved. You may not reach that stage, the fourth stage of enlightenment. You may not become an arahant in this lifetime. But you may get on the first stage, second stage, third stage of enlightenment. It is more likely, as a monk, if you cope with that life well, that you will, because it's all you're doing. You're dedicating 100% of your life by getting rid of everything else in your life, putting it away, aside, behind you, to concentrate on that, your efforts in that direction only. So it is the fast track. So like it's the A road or the motorway to the destination, as opposed to the slower, more scenic route of lay life. You'll still get there though, and it really has to be determined on your personality and what stage you're at with your practice as to which direction you go, carrying on practicing in lay life or monastic life. So this is why one would become a monk. Free yourself of worldly distraction to concentrate solely on the practice of sila, moral virtue, a much stricter vinaya for bhikkhus, 227 rules, for bhikkhunis, 311 rules to follow, not just 5. And this is for as long as you are wearing these robes and are a bhikkhu. It isn't a lifetime vow or ordination. You can disrobe at any time. Now, there are no disadvantages to that. The advantage of that is that you have this confidence in your practice that and that alone is the reason you are staying in these robes, remaining a bhikkhu, not because you're forced to. Again, a reason not to be running away from a difficult life into monastic life is you could then stay in monastic life longer than it is appropriate for you because you have no alternative. Hence, I spoke of recently in a recent talk of this kind of spiritual welfare system that does develop in all religious practices where there are communities of monastics and religious orders and communes, and this is often where people in charge of cults prey on vulnerable individuals whom have no alternative other than to stay. And it may work, it may be okay for them for a while, but there will come a time when resentment will build up, and this is no way to be freeing yourself from suffering. If there's any resentment or disliking about what you're doing, there will always be difficult times and aversion will arise, but we learn to see it, and through understanding the truth of existence, through understanding anicca, uncertainty, impermanence, through understanding dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering, and anatta, not self and out of our control, we learn to appreciate more vividly all of these vicissitudes of our existence in monastic life, just as well as you can in lay life appreciate and understand all of the difficulties and changes you experience in the ordinary world. The first step then, you've decided you want to take your practice to another level and become a monk. I would suggest firstly, the first step is you are meditating regularly, you have reduced your activities such as going out to restaurants, clubs, nightclubbing, cinemas, sporting events, to really concentrate on this Buddhist practice. But to some extent in lay life one is still involved in these things as a matter of course through family connections, social connections. But you can reduce this to quite a significant level in lay life also. It is good to practice taking the 8 precepts, not necessarily taking, but abiding by the 8 precepts as often as you can. But at least on the 2 Uposatha days of full moon and new moon, or the 4 if you include the half moons, or even if you're in a working life still, just on Saturdays or Sundays, keeping 8 precepts. Now lay people have 5 precepts: no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. And when you visit a monastery, that's okay. If you go to stay in a monastery, or if what I'm talking about in lay life, you want to use these 8 precepts as a way of increasing your devotion to the practice and freeing your mind, because all of these rules are not rules. They are tools to free your mind from distraction, from disturbance, from the kilesas, which is the Pali word for the defilements, these defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. So to assist your practice, taking the 8 precepts, it is no killing, no stealing, they remain the same. Number 3 is no sexual activity whatsoever. Then no lying, no intoxicants, and then number 6 is you do not eat after midday. So from dawn until midday you can eat solid food. Really as many meals as you like, as much as you like, but usually in the monastery you'll only have 1. Now, in yesterday's talk, I was talking about my routine. That is the generally monastic routine throughout monasteries throughout the world. That similar routine of one meal in the morning. This frees you up hugely in the afternoons. It frees up your mind from thinking about food. It frees up all of the activity surrounding the preparation, the getting and the eating and the cleaning up of food. But it's mainly the thinking about it all of the time. One meal a day is sufficient. So this is the 6th precept. The 7th is kind of 2, because it's no entertainment and no adornments or beautification. So no entertainment is music, watching movies, Netflix, whatever we have these days on the television, going to cinemas, listening to, going to shows. None of this, no entertainment of that nature, and no beautification as in terms of makeups, hairstyles, earrings, jewellery. Even malas that we have in Buddhism shouldn't be worn. Used, kept in a pocket, but not worn around the neck or around the wrists. Any of these accoutrements are abandoned. For simplicity, for cleanliness, for tidiness, for ease and peace of mind. And also, if you're in an environment which is a community environment with other people, you are reducing the tendency towards trying to attract other people, trying to be attractive to other people, which is of course the point of all that activity. Now, when it comes to 10 precepts, which I'll speak about in a minute, the seventh precept splits into 2. So the 8th precept is no sleeping in a luxurious bed. So you sleep on the floor, really, is the practice. But the specific rules are so many inches off the floor, a bed, and no big thick mattresses. Basically, not a great big comfy huge bed with a TV at one end and drinks cabinets coming out of here and there and stereo systems and water underneath it bubbling around. None of this stuff, just basically what you need to sleep. Not to luxuriate in sleep, because the practice is about eating little, sleeping little and speaking little. I think I said yesterday, sleeping little and sleeping little. Well, it is like that. You don't sleep much, but you don't need to sleep much, because meditation is very restorative in itself. When you go to stay in a monastery, so the next step would be, if you're visiting a monastery regularly, and I think this is how it happened with me, I was able to ask, but normally you'd find a monastery and you write. Or these days I expect there's an application on the website. So if you found a monastery where you want to go, because the first thing you should do before you even ever consider ordination is you need to, and it is a requirement, that you have stayed in a monastery before. Otherwise, how do you know? You cannot tell from what you've seen on YouTube. Don't believe any of that. What I'm saying is true, but you're not smelling, you're not feeling, you're not experiencing the emotions day to day, you're not sleeping on this floor, you haven't got the snakes out there, you're not experiencing what it's really like. You're just seeing the good bits, the nice bits. I'm sharing with you all of the beautiful stuff with my beautiful friends, my Kalyana Mita. I don't want to share with you my toilet, my hole in the ground, which is full of geckos and spiders as big as my hand. I don't talk about the spiders as big as my hand, do I? I talk about the beautiful little geckos with their smiley faces and happy eyes, and these lovely pretty dogs. But in my bathroom, there are spiders like this size. And of course, associated with spiders are webs everywhere. So wherever you're walking, you sort of have to walk like this, webs, as well as mosquitoes and frogs on the floor. It's all of this, you see, that I don't share with you. But these are things you would experience, not necessarily in your own country, but if you were abroad. But there are other things, equally as unpleasant, living in a monastery in whatever country you're in. Maybe not of a animal, physical nature, but certainly emotionally and psychologically, problems you have to deal with. As I say, you're not running away from problems, you're just getting a whole lot of new ones, and you're really facing the way you cope with them. This is the important thing to understand. Wherever you go, whatever you do, however far you run, you're always there. You are there. And all of your problems are here. The mind is the forerunner of all things. So this goes with you. You arrange to stay at the monastery firstly. Now you have retreats, and these are often meditation retreats with lots of people going, and they're all well and good, but that's not quite the same, because you're with a lot of other lay people and you're all going at the end of it, and they're not all necessarily, any of them, considering ever becoming monks. So the first thing you need to do, having regularly visited, if you're not able to regularly visit a monastery, that's okay. But at some stage you need to arrange to go and stay in a monastery for at least 3 nights. That's also the maximum that you can stay for the first time. And when I say these numbers and these facts, I'm basing it on this Ajahn Chah Thai Forest tradition and other monasteries I have experienced of other traditions, because that's all I can tell you about. But they've all been the same. And there's only a few. There's my monasteries in India, and these ones in Thailand, and the ones in England that I've stayed at. So they've all been the same as this. And that routine that I spoke of yesterday was the same in those also. With the exception of India, where they had breakfast as well. And some of the English monasteries, I think they have breakfast as well. Some monks, not all of them. But you can choose not to. Anyway, you decide to go and stay for 3 days if you can, and that's the first thing. We used to have to write. I think you can apply online or something now, but this is where you would really get a feel. And when you stay there for 3 days, you would be on the 8 precepts. And once you've done that, you can then ask if it went well to go and stay there for a bit longer. I think it's usually a week. And that's usually the maximum, or maybe 10 days. I think, actually, yeah, I think it's probably 10 days is the specific number, is the maximum then. After that, then the monks, or at least some of them, will have got to know you there. They usually have a guest monk, someone in charge of guests in the larger monasteries. But in the smaller ones they won't. But someone, they'll get to know you, whether the place is good for you or not. They're compassionate people, monks. They'll be caring about you, not whether you're good for them. It's whether it's appropriate and good for you that matters. You're not really bringing anything into the monastery to offer. You're leaving all of that behind. Don't think you're going because you can be a good monk, you're a good meditator, you're a good sweeper, a good washer-up, or a good electrician, or a good builder. They don't care. You shouldn't care. That's all being left behind. You're starting a scratch. You've got to go with an open mind to be wrong with all of what you've perceived before about being a monk, and accepting of all you learn and you are told. You're not taught, you're told, and you do as you are told. Now, I'm sounding harsh there, but this is how one breaks down this sense of self. This belief in one's abilities. Oh, I'm going to be such a good monk with my meditation, and I'm so experienced in the Dharma and the Vinaya, and I know the Dhammapada, I can recite it, and I have researched and understand the Abhidharma. But you come and live here for a week with all of that, it's not going to do you any good against a spider this big crawling on your face in the night, or a cobra coming through the leaves. You may be even equanimous, but you've really got to be accepting of death. Now that's way in the extreme, okay? That's coming to this forest monasteries in Thailand, or in Burma, or Myanmar, or Sri Lanka, or in parts of India. But think of it that way. You're leaving everything behind, even your name and your identity and your hair and your clothes. You're going to become a monk. So even when you visit for 3 days, think that way. Then you go for 10 days, think that way on 8 precepts. You're going to know then, by then, also whether it's going to be okay for you. Right, you've decided you want to become a monk with all of that I've just said, and you then ask in the monastery, or you maybe write to them, and little is required from you other than whatever your age, if your parents are alive or one of them is alive, you need their permission. That is one of the Buddha's rules. This isn't a modern thing, but it is upheld. You cannot become ordained without your parents' permission. I'm not going to go into the sutta and the whys and wherefores for that, because we won't have time in this talk, maybe another time. But that's required. Usually you take with you, for ordination in real Buddhist countries, you take with you your bowl and your robes. But appreciably in non-Buddhist countries you haven't access to those things, so they will supply those things. And also in Buddhist countries they will supply those things if you don't turn up with them readily anyway. I did have all those ready for me in Thailand for my ordination here, which then didn't go ahead for one reason or another. And so I took those with me to India when I ordained in India. This is the traditional way. You turn up with your bowl and your robe and you say, ordain me, I'm surrendering myself and my life to you, my teacher. Simple as that. But you'll need to talk to the monastery, write to them and ask if you can come to the monastery you want to become a monk. And even then, you're not going to ordain or even be close to it. So before you get to the stage I've just said, there's this process. And bear with me, it's quite long. You begin as the Pali word is kapya, which is like a temple boy or assistant. Doesn't matter if you're 45 years old or 40 years old, however old I was in my 40s anyway, 50, or in your 50s, you're still a temple boy, and you are the boy. You do all of the jobs. A kapya is the Pali word, and in India, I'm not sure about other countries, you'd be called a kapya. And in Thailand, that is a pakao, which just means white cloth, pakao. And so a white clothed lay person living in the monastery. And you live there then on 10 precepts, doing all the jobs for the monks that they can't do, and cleaning and very many jobs. And you'd probably be a kapya or a pakao for a year. Now this varies slightly. Some places you go in and you become an anagarika, if they know you well, straight away, which is kind of a prelim stage to ordination. And in Thailand, I'm not sure they do that here. It varies. But if you take anagarika ordination, so from my process I had to, but you take anagarika ordination after you've been a kapya, an assistant, if you like, a pakao, for about a year. And then you are wearing kind of robes. You take the 10 precepts. So number 7 becomes 2. So it's no entertainment and no beautification as 2. Which makes the sleeping in a higher bed number 9, and number 10 is you renounce the use of money. You are no longer allowed to use money. Now in some monasteries anagarikas still use money, in some they don't. So these are variances between actual monasteries. Essentially when you become a novice bhikkhu, from that point on you don't even touch money, a samanera. So at this stage it's a little bit flexible, depending probably on the requirements of the monastery, who they've got to deal with certain things. As a pakao, as an anagarika, anything in white clothes, anything that isn't orange, you're going to pick up all responsibility for anything that people in orange cannot do. So they'll adjust those boundaries accordingly. So this is part of the training though, being able to pick up those responsibilities. Even driving, for instance, you could be driving monks around, and going out shopping even, things like that. In my case it was a lot of cleaning, but I'm going to talk in the next video about my experience about this, so I'll try not to relate too much of that into this one, because that would make it too long. And this is about, generally speaking, what you do. So you've decided to live in a monastery, so you go there and you basically wear white for a year, and you clean and you do jobs, but you also are living with monks, seeing day-to-day life with monks. You go on alms round with them. You'll be behind, not getting food in a bowl yourself. You'll be just taking the food and carrying the bags, being an assistant, getting the bowls ready for the monks, helping the monks. It's hard work, very hard work. And then you may be made an anagarika for at least a year or 2 years. Either way, you're going to live as a pakal or an anagarika, a kapia or an anagarika. Anagarika means gone forth, homeless one. So you've officially taken a step to be on the path towards the next step, which is samanera ordination. A kapia, you're still thinking about it, and the monks are still thinking about you. But either way, if you go straight in as an anagarika or you stay as a kapia, for at least 1 year, usually 2 years, you will be in that state, living in the monastery. After which you will be considered, and you usually are required to ask, but they'll tell you when it's appropriate to ask, for ordination, which is called pabbaja in the Pali. This is when you become a monk. You get your new name, and you shave your hair, your head. You may have already done that also as an anagarika, but officially it's when you take pabbaja. This is the first stage of ordination, officially. In the Buddha's time there was just one stage, Erhi Bhikkhu. He just used to say, go forth, homeless wanderer. Boom, that was it, very simple. But it's had to become more detailed in order to make sure it's okay for the person and the person is okay for it. So you are then given, after 1 or 2 years minimum, the opportunity to become a samanera, a monk. And you are ordained, a very simple ordination, and from then on you are a monk. You then take on, in addition to the 10 precepts, the 75 Sakya rules. Now these 75 rules are part of the Patimokkha that we recite every Uposatha, and they are about etiquette, deportment, anything from how you eat to how you go to the toilet even. As a monk you cannot go to the toilet standing up, you have to be sitting down, or in case of countries in Asia you're squatting. You don't stand up and pee behind a tree, you squat down. Now the reasons for this is for decency if you're outside and in public obviously, but also you are making sure that you are going to the toilet in a very suitable place where there's no insects or animals to harm. And anyway, this 75 training rules cover all of that, cover sampalapapa, you know, no idle gossip and chit-chat. How you eat, no chippy-chappa it's called, when you're eating quietly. No licking your fingers. All of these kind of things are all in the 75 training rules. So you've got about 85 odd rules. Plus you have the monastery, the temple, core wat, which are the bylaws of the monastery. And they're in addition to the Patimokkha, the 227 rules. For instance, most core wats will say you cannot drink standing up. You must be sitting down. You do not, well, there's so many. And there's not time to go into them all. But these you have to become familiar with also, whilst you're a kapia, an anagarika, whilst you're a samanera. You need to really live these rules to know them and understand them. And that's what you're doing through living in monasteries under these conditions, but with this newborn status as a samanera, a monk. You have the lower robe, this robe, the outer robe or upper robe. You don't have this sangati yet, that comes later on. You will then be a samanera for either 1 or 2 years minimum, at least 1 year. So let's have a count up. You've been a kapia 1 year, an anagarika 1 year, so that's 2 years. A samanera for another year or maybe 2 years. So minimum fast tracking, an anagarika 1 year, a samanera 1 year, so that's 2 years. only then, and as only if the senior monks of the monastery consider it appropriate and you're ready, only then will you be able to be invited, and you then still ask for full ordination or upasampada. That is when you become a bhikkhu. So assuming this is right for you and you've decided that this is the path of the rest of your life, because although you can take temporary ordination, people do in Asia, that's a whole different thing to what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about a commitment to the practice. One shouldn't look at it as a temporary thing. I do not compare the two. People who go to Chiang Mai for 14-day being a monk, and it's a very good thing to do. It's called taking pabhaja. You really only take pabhaja, not full ordination, not upasampada. You can do that in lots of countries nowadays. You're knowing at the end of it you're going back to worldly life. It's a totally and entirely different thing, I'm afraid. You go into this life, well, I always went into this life with the full intention of never returning to lay life. I'd practiced sufficiently and for long enough, and I'd lived in monasteries for long enough prior to my ordination to know that's what I wanted, which I'll explain in the next video. But you too should think this way if you're going this route. If you want to avoid all those steps, you just want to go to a monastery, you find a monastery, I think you pay some money and they ordain you and you're a monk for 10 days and then you disrobe and you go home. That isn't really being a monk. That's not becoming a monk. That's experiencing the life of a monk for 14 days. And it's great fun, it's enjoyable, it's an excellent experience of learning, but it isn't the same. I think you'll agree with me, it's not the same. You've still got a car and a house at home, possibly a wife and children, I don't know, but it's not the same. So, you're ready for bhikkhu ordination, and that's coming next. You are then going to have the ceremony of upasampada. I'm not telling you about what you have to learn because you don't need to know that. They will teach you what you have to learn, what you have to recite, what you have to say during these ceremonies, what you need to know. In the bhikkhu ordination, though, you are taking full ordination. So you are taking on the responsibility of abiding by the 227 bhikkhu rules. This is a huge responsibility and a huge difference to the life of that of a samana, a novice monk. So we have a novice monk here who always wants to be a novice monk and has always been a novice monk for a long time, I think, because he enjoys that life. A little bit more flexibility, but not so much. Ordinarily that's not the case outside of Thailand. Thailand's slightly different. It's adapted itself to the culture, as it does in all countries. So you need to research the country you're in, or a country you may be going to. This is another thing you need to give a lot of consideration to for your ordination. One thing I didn't mention, which is important, is the minimum age for ordination is 20 years of age. You can become a novice monk before the age of 20, a samanera, but a bhikkhu ordination cannot take place before the age of 20. For bhikkhunis it's younger. I don't know the exact age. I think it's very much younger, and I can't remember quite why. But for males you have to be 20 years old for full ordination to become a bhikkhu. There's no maximum age, but you'll find in some countries, in my own country, the 4 Ajahn Chah Thai Forest Tradition Monasteries there have an age limit for ordination of 50, it was when I was there, and so you have to bear that in mind. You also, because of the questions you are asked, and also for your own sake, and for the monastery, the community you're joining sake, need to be in full good health as far as you know. Technically, for the ordination you have to have all of your limbs I think a missing finger is okay. Someone did question that with me, and I said, don't be crazy, and it was never questioned again. It wasn't a monk who said that. That's why I said, don't be crazy. But an arm missing, a leg missing, that sounds like pretty unpolitically correct, but it's just one of the rules. Although, you know, if that's the case, you talk to a monastery about it, and they may be modern in their approach and have some ways around these things. So I don't know about that. It's not my experience. I can only ever talk to you from my own experience, which is really the point of these videos, because anything else I don't know much about in life. So you become a bhikkhu at that point. Now, time is getting on. In terms of, because I can see it's getting a little bit darker now in terms of this talk, but there's going to be a part 2, because I'm going to speak in the next talk about my own experience of this process I've just gone through, specifically how it affected me and where I am today with it, and how I've come from where I was to where I am now, as best I can in 40 to 50 minute talk. There is that previous video on here called How to Become a Monk. I've never seen it, but when I was looking at it to send the link to somebody, one of the many people who have asked this question, which is why I'm making this video, it was firstly very difficult to find. I don't know why. I put in How to Become a Monk on YouTube, and many things unrelated to that came up. All many Indian monks with these huge numbers of followers, because they are speaking English. It's a popular thing, Indian monks speaking English, it seems, on YouTube. But not so many foreigners. Anyway, I put in English monk, it came up straight away. That's all you need to do to find me, is English monk. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I found the link, but I only saw the little bit of at the beginning. I thought, oh no, that was when I was in that Hindu temple trying to find some peace and quiet, which you can't find in India to make videos. I was subsequently sent, when I was here, what's it called when it cuts all the noise, background noise off? A noise cancelling wireless microphone. Very good for India, but I haven't used it here because it's nice background signs. So I've got it. The same person sent me a long lead instead to use this microphone. The background sounds here are nice, but in India there's just too much background sounds. But I found this wonderful Hindu temple there where I used to make a lot of videos, so they're worth watching. Just to what goes on in the background sometimes is quite interesting, and how I cope with it or not, as the case may be. So finding that video and to sending that link made me think, well, I ought to make a fresh one of how you become a monk, and that's really what you do. If I've forgotten something and there are any loose ends, then I can try and include it in the talk, the next talk, when I'm making it more specifically about me. Once you ordain as a bhikkhu, it doesn't end there. Now bear in mind, it's taken you 3 to 4 years, minimum of 2 years to get to this stage. You are then what they call a navaka bhikkhu. You take dependence on your teacher, and also your teacher takes dependence on you. You look after him in exchange for him teaching you. This is a kind of mutual dependence, interdependence, if you like. This is the official relationship of teacher-student in monastic life. You'll probably, as well as your upacharya, who ordains you and is your official teacher, be appointed an actual acharya, a teacher, or in Thailand an ajahn, whom teaches you about the Dharma, meditation, the virtues, the sila, the patimokkha, monastic life, and everything about living here in the monastery, as if you know nothing. You are taught as if you know nothing. So there's no good, I know this, I know, it doesn't matter. You shut up and you listen and you do. Even if you've got 20 years experiences of all of these different monasteries, you're starting again. And for 5 years, you're a navaka bhikkhu. And you cannot leave that monastery. You stay in that monastery for 5 years. after which, with the abbot's permission, and also in that time, that 5 years, with the abbot's permission, your upacharya's permission, you can go to other monasteries. I'm still in that stage of Navaka Bhikkhu, but my permission was given to me by my upacharya in India to come here to Thailand, where I've been appointed an acharya, an ajahn, to continue my Navaka Bhikkhu-ship, if you like, here, 5 years. After 5 years, only and only then can you go wandering as an independent Majjhima Bhikkhu, so a middle time Bhikkhu. Technically, you cannot give Dharma talks and you cannot teach, this is in Thailand, until you've been a Bhikkhu for 10 years, which is a Maha Bhikkhu or Thera Bhikkhu in Thailand, in India, in the Pali. Here it's called Ajahn. You get the title of Ajahn because you've been a Bhikkhu for 10 years, so you're a teacher. So that's why I always say I'm not teaching, I'm not really giving Dharma talks, I'm just sharing my experiences, as many Navaka Bhikkhu, Majjhima Bhikkhus seem to be doing these days. It seems to be okay. But I'm always questioning it whether I should be or not, because of course I'm here in Thailand. But most of my audience is outside of Thailand. Albeit a large number of them these days seem to be in Thailand also, but possibly they are Pharangs, as Thailand call foreigners, foreign people living here, because of the language thing. So you, even then, you stay in the monastery as a new Bhikkhu training. And this, before you really fully qualified to leave, after that 5 years, it's taken you at least minimum of 7 years, probably more like 9 or 10. And even then you can't teach. Only at 10 years have you really made it. But then you've had 2 years prior to that, so that's 12 years, yes? And in the Hindu traditions of monks, and many people whom are asking me from India about becoming a monk are thinking of this, becoming taking sannyas, or whatever it's called, to become a sadhu with a teacher in a cave, like you see in the YouTube videos. And I experienced and lived with and stayed in caves with in India, so I know a lot about them. And they are the same, 12 years. There's usually this 12-year thing. So it's even longer, I think, than becoming a doctor. It's important, though, that you've had this background and this understanding and the opportunity to achieve something in your practice, attain something in your practice, before you're trying to share that or teach others, or profess to know about these things. So similarly in that tradition, in India, those Hindu traditions or other things, they have this 12-year thing too. So it's a long process, but really it starts when you renounce and you leave home. You go forth in that respect as an anagarika. You can shave your head, you wear some white clothes, and you're on the 8 or 10 precepts. This is the first stage. And that is the real marker point. The rest is just, it goes on forever. It's like anything, you're never at the top. You'll always have people above you. So this is the way it is. Every Vasa, every monsoon season, this next 3 months coming up, you are 1 year older. So if you ordain in if you ordain in, say, June, and the Vasa begins in July, at the end of, in the full moon of October, you have 1 Vasa. And then the following year, after the monsoon season, the rains retreat, at the end of that, the full moon of October, you have 2 Vasas, and so on. You miss one of those rains retreats, it doesn't count, which is what I said in the talk yesterday. But this is the only hierarchy. There's no other hierarchy, no qualifications. Your age, actual age, is irrelevant. If you're 55 like me, and there's a monk who is 6 Vasas, or 7 Vasas, and he's 25 years old, he's my boss. And this is always the way. And you'll always have monks with more Vasas than you. Till you get to about 60 or 70 vasas, then it's probably quite hard to find them. But there are many monks teaching today with 60 vasas. If you ordained at 20, 60 vasas makes you 80 years old. So you look at Ajahn Sumedho, he's in his 80s, 88 now, and well, look at the Dalai Lama, there's the same age as Ajahn Sumedho, and there's many in Thailand. So there's a long way to go. It's a long, long journey. It's not a quick career. So it needs to be thought about long and hard too. But approached with not a view towards getting or becoming, but relinquishing and letting go of what you had. That is it, just that. Renunciation. This is how you become a samana and lead the holy life of a Buddhist monk. I hope that's helpful, and in the next talk I will talk about my own experience of this process. So thank you for watching.